This project was made possible with support from California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. So all of you, if you can, visit www.calhum.org if you want to find out more. But let's go ahead and jump into it. So my name is Ivan. I'll be one of the main hosts. My co-host here is Mia, and I'll let her introduce herself real quick.
Hello, my name is Mia Becerra. I also work at the Norco Library. I will be asking the first question. It's for everybody involved. How did you build trust with each other in those early days of the First Rainbow Coalition?
How did we build trust?
Yes, like among your group.
Well, I think one of the ways of building trust is because we were all pretty much in the same boat. Although we were different colors and different backgrounds, we were all in the same boat because we were all in our very oppressed communities with a lot of police brutality and political repression. And so just through that, we started trusting each other. Although I would have to say at the beginning, it was kind of rough, and I think Poison will agree, blending together, Blacks, Hispanics, and hillbillies. And, some people couldn't handle it, but other people, because of what our revolutionary thoughts, our revolutionary actions, sort of gave us a gateway to work together and to trust each other, because we could tell, the people that weren't sincere over the people that were. So I think that's one of them, and certainly worked with, in the Southern community, Southern white community. But yeah, I don't know, Poison, you got an idea?
Well, sure. We were blessed with a very daring organizer,
yes,
Bob Lee. He was an icebreaker that was able to understand the concept of poverty, a boat, as Hai said, that we were all in. And basically, we discovered that we were suffering the same acts of oppression by the empire, particularly the Cook County Democratic Organization. Police brutality, unemployment, no access to public facilities, the desire to gentrify areas that we lived in, occupation by hostile fascist elements, no justice in the system, poor living conditions, inadequate education, all of these things, all of these ills that we still find emerging in today's 21st century empire.
And I'm going to go ahead and not answer this question because I wasn't there when these events took place.
Cool. So the next question we have lined up, which you've kind of already touched upon, in the film, we kind of see that there are members in your respective organizations that weren't really on board with the decision to kind of work together, right, across racial boundaries, essentially. So how was it that you all overcame that, right? Because it's not only the external, the county itself, the city, but it's also the people within your own organizations, your friends. How did you overcome that pushback?
Well, it was no cakewalk. At that time, the Black Panther Party was really evolving. Membership within the party was growing, and the appeal was primarily a Black nationalist appeal, and dealing with the history of racism. There were members of the party who didn't have that concept of internationalism, identifying on a global scale, but simply identifying with their own unique communities. And some members of the Illinois chapter of the Black Panther Party actually left after we made an alliance with some hillbillies who wore Confederate flag patches on their berets. But being true internationalists, being able to see through all of the indoctrination that this racist system has put upon us, we were able to see common interests, common ideas that we could struggle for.
Yeah, and to add to that, Poison's 100% on it. Coming from a Southern background, culture, being raised, racist, a lot of ways, being raised as a white supremacist, and still believing in, a lot of people still believing in, slavery and being, the white being the dominant race. It was hard to overcome with some of the people, but we were young, we were kids. I was 17, but we began to look at other organizations and other groups, but we had also experienced all the street violence and all the other violence that took place, in the other communities, and we knew it was happening. And so when we started, there were only 3 of us actually that started the organization, and we believed that people could do more through unity. Now, we did get some help through Students for a Democratic Society, which came into the Uptown area to look for jobs, but found out that there was much more needed than jobs, and had gotten some people together from there was a street gang called the Peacemakers, and some of those folks had turned political. And so one of the first things they did was do a march on the Soledad police station, and in the area, which brought a lot of people together. And so, but still there were a lot of people that couldn't handle it. So we had to work out within ourselves our racism, because we were racist. We admitted we were racist. We admitted it to the Panthers. We admitted it to Young Lords. We admitted it to everybody, but we were trying to work on it. And that's, some people just were not willing to do that. They just couldn't see that. And so we actually had to demonize racism, and just throw it out and demonize it, look at it as a demon, before we could start working equally, with other groups. And so it was necessary that people left. Those people that left would have dragged the organization down. So we welcome the fact that they left, but at the same time, they were still supporting us in the community. And so we kind of grew from there.
Our next question, what are some of the most important leadership skills that you learned in your time as community organizers?
Well, I think the leadership skills that we looked at was, first of all, none of us had really been leaders, in the Young Patriots. I can only speak for the Young Patriots. none of us had really been leaders, and most of us couldn't read, and so we had always looked to, other leaders to learn from. And so we actually looked toward the Black Panthers. We looked upon the Black Panthers as being, an organization that was actually doing something for their community, and at the same time, we're trying to fight racism. So what better to do but to work with another, a Black organization, and also with the Hispanic organization with the Young Lords. But I think one of the greatest lessons that we learned was to work with other organizations. In other words, when we helped the Panthers, we became a Panther. We didn't question what they did. We got their leadership, and then if we needed something, they would work with us, and they would be a patriot and work it out that way, the Rainbow Coalition. So it was more a philosophical, I guess, thing to do, but it was I guess as a philosophy that was put down by Fred Hampton, that became such a great leader, and Bobby Lee, who was, of course, considered to be our leader, even though we were Southern white. He also was the chairperson of our police brutality committee. He was Black. And so those were the types of leadership skills we needed, to work with other people, and to more understand how the system worked, even with the Confederate flag.
Hi, you hit the nail on the head. We were literally blessed with leaders that had innate leadership skills. Fred Hampton was the consummate leader, so much so that the state security apparatus and all of the forces within the empire decided that they would carry out a state-sanctioned assassination of him. He was only 20 years old, 21, barely 21, when he was assassinated in his bed after he had been drugged by the state security apparatus in the form of FBI and their informants and other elements. But Fred was he was born to lead. He had so much charisma. He was an extremely eloquent orator. He had an undying love for the people. All of these qualities were combined in Fred Hampton. And then we were also blessed, as I said, with Robert E. Lee III, Bobby Lee. He was the consummate community organizer, so much so that he made an impression on Saul Alinsky, who's supposed to be the essential community organizer. So we had this kind of leadership. We as I say, we were blessed because these were young people, just like you are. And young people have the ideas. They can, they understand that they have to be active in order to improve the quality of their future. And both Fred and Bob Lee were young, energetic leaders. And I think this comes out to a degree in the film.
Thank you that was just awesome, man. You guys' answers. But this question is going to go to Ray specifically. So you pretty much managed to put into one movie all of these different communities, right? All of their different stories. What was it like reaching into that history, right? Because I can only imagine the amount of stories that there are surrounding the first Rainbow Coalition, because you got three major groups and all these amazing leaders. So what was that like for you?
I mean, it was tough because, I mean, as you're mentioning there's just so much to tell, and you want to put it all in there. But of course, you have a length issue for broadcast. And also for a lot of these groups, people don't know about them. So you have to, it's called exposition, which is like you're giving information. And you try not to put a lot of exposition in a film because it slows the film down because you want to get to the story. But in this film, you have to put exposition because people were not aware of the Young Patriots. You have to explain how is there a huge Appalachian community, a Southern white community in Chicago? Nobody knows that, so you have to explain it. And so, I mean, that was one of the challenges. And in some ways, again, there could be, and hopefully there will be other films about this movement. So in our mind, we were trying to create like the first stepping stone to learn about the ideas of the Rainbow Coalition and how it got started. And so we kind of just embraced that at a certain point, and we have to recognize our limitations. And the reality is that the archives were extremely expensive. So it's not like we could put everything in there we wanted to because we had to pay for it. But the other thing is it actually took 12 years to make the film. So there was a lot of research, a lot of and unfortunately, there are a lot of people we interviewed that aren't in the film. A lot of interviews we thought would be part of the story, but we just didn't have a time, because one of the things you realize when you're editing is if you have a lot of faces, the audience can't remember all the faces. So it's better to have a couple of people you focus on, and then so you have some connection with those people. The more you hear Poison talk, the more you hear High Thurman talk, the more you can connect with them because you get a sense of their personality. And that's what you kind of have to go to when you're making a film. Otherwise, it becomes like just a bunch of voices that you really can't connect with. And we were really trying to make people understand what the coalition was about, have a connection with the people who formed it, and also get a sense of where they were coming from at that time. I mean, Chicago was the most segregated city in the United States. And it was, also that unique background with Mayor Daley, with the police repression in Chicago, with the Red Squad, with the FBI. It was its own like unique place in the history of the country. And the idea was to bring the audience there and to set them in Chicago at that time and let this story unfold. And so that was the challenge. And again, I mean, I try not to think about it too much because you never want to look back, but you wish there was so much more you could put in, but it's kind of like you have to, if you think about it too much, you just drive yourself crazy. So I try not to think about it too much.
If there were no limitations, how long do you think you would like to make the movie or like the documentary with all of that information?
I actually think, I think the easiest thing to do, again, it's a different time, would make an hour about each movement, an hour about the Young Lords, an hour about the Young Patriots, an hour about the Black Panthers in Chicago in '69, then make a last episode, which is longer, about when they all got together with the Rainbow Coalition. That would, I think, would have been great, because each story, I think you could do an hour story about the Young Patriots for sure. You can do an hour story about the Black Panthers and the rise of Fred Hampton in Chicago, and same with the Young Lords. I mean, that's its own documentary. But again, that would be on my the wishing list if I had unlimited funds. I think it would have been possible. And actually, the times have changed now. Like when you go to Netflix or any stuff, they like these series now, these long series, like 4 or 5 episodes. But that's new. That wasn't like 4 or 5 years ago. People weren't really doing that. But if I had to start over now, I would try to pitch them, hey, how about a 4-hour thing about these groups? 1 hour on each, and then the final hour about them coming together.
Yeah, just to add to that, several years ago, a producer out of New York was talking about doing a limited series on the Young Patriots, and he wanted to try to get the national networks involved. So he approached the big three, and all of them turned him down except ABC. They said, yeah, we like the concept, but we need to have a shootout between the Young Patriots and the Black Panthers, you know? And so we said, screw you, you know, that ain't gonna happen. But they wanted to change the whole thing. It's like Ray was saying, you know, now I think would be a better time to do something like that. You know, and there was also another film called American Revolution 2 that was made in 1969 about the Patriots and the Panthers. Poison was also there. And this was about the uptown community and the Black Panthers coming together.
So for this next question, based on the climate that you all pretty much faced when you were forming the First Rainbow Coalition, and with the deaths of organizers like Fred Hampton, how was it that you found the strength to keep going, right? Because sometimes it feels like it's loss after loss after loss. So how do you get back up and just continue the movement?
Youth, commitment, desire, the spirit of the times, the zeitgeist. It was there. You know, 1968 was one of the most momentous years of the 20th century. You know, you had, of course, imperialism trying to defeat the people's movement in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam, in Laos, in Cambodia. You had the uprisings in Paris and in Rome and in Berlin. And then on campuses across the nation in the US, you had the movement to initiate Black studies programs on college campuses like San Francisco State, where you had a major uprising. So there were all these elements in the air. And as young people, we wanted to be involved. We were suffering from the oppressive forces, fascism, capitalism, and racism. So, you know, we felt we had to do something. We had the energy. I was inspired by the leadership, like Fred Hampton, like Bob Lee, like Huey Newton, Bobby Seale. All of these things were going on. And so being a member of the Black Panther Party was not a weekend type of commitment. It was 24/7 all of the time. You know, we were committed. We were prepared by putting our lives on the line to respond to fascist repression, to respond to all of the attacks of the Richard J. Daley machine and his brutal police forces. So, you know, it was a commitment. It was a love for the people. I mean, we got up at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning to put together our Breakfast for Children program, because children were not getting free lunches in schools in 1969 or 1970. It was the Black Panther Party that first put that program into motion. And we were committed to that. We discovered, you know, it was a joy to be able to feed hungry children, to see their faces before they were going off to school, because it was something that was lacking in the society. So there were all of these elements that grew out of repression that were inspirational to us.
Yeah, and one of the things that I guess Daley never realized, or the police is that they were responsible for creating more radical organizations than anyone else in Chicago because of their oppression. They forced people to do that. And so, yeah, I mean, we had a commitment, but we kind of, we gained strength from each other in the coalition. And that was what was important. It was something to belong to, something real, so yeah. People were dying. We were getting beaten. We were getting thrown in jail. COINTELPRO, counterintelligence program, they were after us. The FBI, even the young lords had one of their pastors murdered, his wife, and we all had people murdered, and we all had threats, and we all suffered. But with the Young Patriots, we didn't know where to go. We couldn't go back home. There was really nothing there. We couldn't go back on the migrant trail because, we'd end up being in the same way. So we stuck around and kept working.
It makes sense. The movement can't stop, even with all that happening. Like, if you stop, then what was the point in the first place? Our next question is, what words of advice would you give to people currently in hostile environments who don't feel safe in using their voice to be seen and heard?
Well,
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Hank.
I was going to ask the question again. I didn't quite understand the question.
Sorry, it's a little long. Just what advice would you give to people who are trying to be seen and heard, but are afraid to use their voices because they are in hostile environments?
Well, you've got to get over that fear. You've got to overcome that fear, and you've got to organize. We're all septuagenarians, but young people, you have the energy, you have the desire, you have creative thoughts that need to come out, but you've got to organize. You've got to come together and organize to unite. You've got to find, to analyze your interests, to find your common interests that you share and work on those things, put them together, organize them around them, challenge the system that's repressing those issues of yours.
Yeah, and one of the techniques that works sometimes is, I taught a class in organizing, and a lot of times people are organizers, except they don't know what role of an organizer they are. And if you could explain to them of what an activist is, or what a role of an organizer is, which isn't always out there getting your head beat in or arguing with somebody. But if you find a commonality, for instance, that Poison was talking about, the commonality that we had was the point program that the Panthers set up. And so the Young Patriots built their point program off of that. And I know it wasn't too long ago when Trump was in office, there was a demonstration here in Huntsville, Alabama, and there was a bunch of high school kids showed up with Trump signs. And what we did, we grabbed a bunch of poor people's campaign literature, walked into the middle of them, and said, don't you think you have a responsibility to help the poor in your community? And they said, well, yeah. So we went over the information, and when they left, each one of them came by and shook my hand. So you got to get over that fear of talking to people, because most people are going to listen unless they're so far over that you can't talk to them.
Okay, so for our final question before we open it up to the rest of the audience members to ask questions, are there any organizations or projects that you would like us to know about or support?
I ran a school called North Alabama School for Organizers. And we hold organizing classes. We have fireside chats, and a number of different political education classes. We also have what we used to call in the Panthers coined as survival programs pending revolution. We have a car clinic where we raise money and go out and fix people's cars. They can't afford it, so they can get to work. Last clinic we had, we fixed 17 cars, and we're already giving away a car, and we're planning a benefit with another program we have called Blues to Bluegrass, which we've organized musicians, and they do benefits to raise money, and they're doing on this Sunday to raise money for this clinic. We also have what's called the Homeless Construction Coalition. We get these shipping pallets, put them together, put plywood on them, and let homeless people put their tents on it because they lose a lot of their stuff. And we'll do that for the for their pets and their security sheds or whatever. And also, we were just co-sponsors of the first Huntsville Human Rights Film Festival about 2 weeks ago. Ray was there, and it was a very, very big success. And so there's all kinds of ways to get organized. But yeah, I'm of course pushing the program, which is still a legacy of the Rainbow Coalition, is what we call it.
And not to sound reformist, but you could also get involved in encouraging people to vote. I live in Texas, and the biggest problem is the Republicans in Texas want to deny the privilege of voting to non-white voters because they're caught up in 2042. But get out. You can come together and do voter registration drives, because if you get involved in that, you can begin to start having an impact on changing the political system as it is. It's very valuable, but it's a start. It's something very simple, and there's nothing illegal about it. But as young people, you can get together and organize these things, because later on in the process, it pay off. I mean, in Harris County, Houston, Texas, where I live, we got together, organized around Bob Lee's younger brother, El Franco Lee. And we got together a vote that made him the first Black county commissioner in the history of Harris County. And he was able to implement changes, God rest his soul. Today, my children benefited from the things that he did. He put in the first Learn to Swim program for youth. It wouldn't have been done without that type of political power. He was not a politician, but he was for the people, and he remained loyal to the people. He was never corrupted, and he was never seriously challenged in a political race, because he had an organization behind him that was able to deliver the votes and bring about some change. Today in Harris County, we have a majority of non-white county commissioners, and changes are underway, but there is, of course, an effort to revert back to the old boy network. And you probably hear about it nationally when you see how they're attacking the county judge, Lena Hidalgo, who is a part of that political process of having the voting power to deliver on the needs of the community.
And Ray, did you have any?
Just brief. I mean, even it doesn't have to. There's different ways to make change in this society. I mean, even what you folks are doing here by trying to expand the history available to that local community by doing these talks and expanding your archive to include people of color and those histories is significant because if you don't know the history, you're kind of lost sometimes about what the possibilities are. And that was important. I mean, even going back to starting this film on the Rainbow Coalition is once I found out about it and its significance, it was important for me to bring that story out to the public because once you find out that there was a Rainbow Coalition that existed, you don't have to feel that you're starting from scratch, that there's no possibility of having a multi-ethnic alliance. But the reality is, because there already was one, and it existed in the most segregated city in the United States with the most hostile fascist mayor probably in the history of this country as well. And it was, came out of that system. So I think that's in some ways that's a celebratory story about what can be. And so anyway, I think I applaud you for the work that you folks are doing to try to, record these histories and get them out there. Because I think sometimes young people don't know what has happened in the past, and they feel that maybe their communities haven't contributed or struggled in this society. And the reality is that they have, and they still are trying to make changes here.
That means a lot coming from you. Thank you. But now we're going to open it up to the audience. If anyone has any questions for any of our guests, please feel free to either unmute, raise your hand, or put it in the chat if you prefer that. Yeah, we'll give it some time. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and ask supplementary questions, I guess.
Hey, before you go, I had a question.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the film, we see you guys are, it seems like filming a podcast. I was wondering if you guys have a podcast. Is that ongoing? Was it just for the film?
Well, I have what's called a Fireside Chat within North Alabama School for Organizers. And I interview various people. I think we've interviewed, I don't know, 30, 40 people, so that's what we do. We work with also with Spice Radio, which is a podcast, and talk about these things.
I must confess, I'm technologically ignorant. I mean, this is the first time that I've been able to set up a Zoom without the help of my children. So I've been on many podcasts, but at the behest of others who were able to establish those things. And I'm remiss in not having learned how to set up podcasts.
Thank you. I was just very interested.
Yeah, the podcast I was there, I actually think it stopped. They ran it for many years. And the people that are in that hosting it, they were members of the SDS, the Students for Democratic Society. And they were in the periphery of that coalition. They were all like kind of, that we didn't include their story because it was going to get too complicated, but they were really, supporting the groups that were in the film. So it was interesting that they're still doing, stuff, trying to get information out. But I think subsequently that podcast has stopped But I think it's, I think I'm always for it when people from communities try to have their own conversations. That's not part of the mainstream media. So I was so excited when they, allowed us to tape. And, there's a lot of possibilities to do those kind of podcast things that I think are important, because the mainstream media is on their own, they're going in their own way. They're interested in Will Smith slapping Chris Rock. You want to talk about that a lot. And there's other things to talk about as well.
So I'm going to go ahead and put a survey for the grant project. Feel free, it's in the chat. For those in the audience, please fill out that survey anytime between now and the end of our program. But I did have a question for Henry, or Poison. I don't know what you prefer. My question was, I know you touched upon this earlier in the session where you talked about having an international mindset. And I know from your bio, you've pretty much had a pretty good worldview for a while, right? Because I think you were in Venezuela for a minute.
Yes.
Did that all originate from the First Rainbow Coalition? Just that idea of wanting to be out in the world and seeing where that took you?
Well, it actually goes back a little over 60 years ago when my father got me involved in the civil rights. And so he instilled a desire within me to be a part of bringing about change. I went to Venezuela. Well, I've lived or worked on 6 continents. So travel or living in other cultures is, to me, the greatest form of education. And it's all about internationalism. I had gone to Venezuela back in 1985, and I was impressed with what I saw. And then I started learning about the Bolivarian movement that was essentially led by Hugo Chavez. And when I moved to Venezuela, I was able to observe what was going on prior to the ascent of Hugo Chavez, and then also witness his campaign and successful election to the presidency of Venezuela. Venezuela reminded me a lot about my experiences in Chicago. The Venezuelan people were some of the most politically conscious and politically active people that I had seen. I hadn't seen anything like them except in growing up in Chicago, which is a very politicized city, which has a long tradition of political action, going back to the foundation of anarchism in this hemisphere, going back to the Haymarket uprising and all of the labor struggles through the early 20th century and on. So Venezuela, is well, we look at it today and we know about the oppression that this empire is visiting on Venezuela, which has the largest proven energy reserves in the world. And it has been completely barricaded, blockaded, and the economy has been destroyed by the powerful financial elements of Washington. you can't even get an airplane flight from the US to Venezuela because the Obama, Trump, Biden triumvirate prevents it. And the economy is constantly being sabotaged. All of the progress that Venezuela is making, there's an attempt to sabotage it. But the brave and glorious Venezuelan people are resisting, still resisting. Coup attempts, invasions, financial plots, all of it.
So again, audience members, if you have questions, feel free. But if not, I'm totally okay with taking up this time to ask you guys questions. Hi, I know you talked about demonizing racism earlier. Have there been any tactics that you would recommend to young people to use to continue to demonize it? Because I know currently, we've been hit with a lot of social media things, and it's new, right? It's a new environment, it's a new place. I'm just wondering if any of the tactics you've used in the past could translate into that new environment.
Yeah, I've been involved in several situations where I've had to address that type of a situation. And I'll go back to probably the first time I really addressed it was probably 69, 70, when we were wearing the Confederate flag. And the Confederate flag was something that we used a racist symbol to recruit racist people or to talk to racist people. Because we were grown up with it. It was just a thing to us. But to some people, it really meant, racism, slaveocracy. And so I remember going into a bar, and we would go in with the flag and the Free Huey button next to it, or some third world country, something, and start a conversation with people in the bars or in the meetings wherever we were. And one man that I knew specifically was really a white supremacist, Klansman. We got into a conversation about blacks and whites and the flag, and I asked him a pointed question. I said, what if, for instance, you're a child, and you do have children, right? He said, yeah, I do. And I said, well, what if that child needed an organ transplant or something like that, and that child was going to die, and the only person there was a person of color? What would you do? Would you let your child die? And he said, well, of course not. I said, you would accept that donation of an organ from a person of color? And he said, well, of course. And I said, well, then why are you so racist? Everything's the same on the inside. The only thing you're looking at is color. And you're causing these, and you hate people because of their color. And that's the only difference here. And so he turned out to be one of our supporters, believe it or not. But I've used that, and I've used other techniques where I will get a person who is a racist, and a lot of times I try to get someone of color and to get them to sit down and talk, and get them to put down, what commonalities do you folks have? Environmental, oppression, or, health. What do you have? And they will come up with commonalities. And then, I can explain that program, that to them, what I did. And a lot of times they will, humanize, racism and start thinking about changing. But it could also be a very difficult and dangerous situation too. We had a gentleman who had went back home to Georgia, and he was at one time a racist, and he was talking to people about free health services and equality, and it was his same peer group that killed him. So there's danger in that too. So you have to really know what you're talking about when you go into it, and you got to be very cautious. And sometimes you can't help them. You can't do anything. They're gonna have to learn more from the world than anything else. But yeah, trying to get them to compare each other. What is it? What's the difference here? And there are definitely some comparisons there.
So we're coming up to our last 5 minutes. So I'll leave this last question to Ray. Ray, so a lot of the work that we do with the community here is trying to outreach and try to build trust, right? So I guess for myself, I wanted to ask you, how was it that you gained the trust, right? To tell these people's stories? Like, what did you do? What helped you in building that trust?
Luckily for me, I've worked on a number of films about movements in the United States. I'd worked on another film about the Black Panthers that I could show people. I said, hey, look at this film. It's done. It got done and it got on PBS. And then I worked on a film about the Chicano movement. Hey, look at this film. So I would show them the work that I've already done to say, hey, I can do this. I'm not just like the guy talking about making a film. But also, you just need to talk to people, and just answer any questions. And I'm always very upfront of what I'm trying to do. Like, hey, I'm trying to make a film. I'm trying to get on PBS. This is why we're trying to get on PBS. And the main reason why is that PBS reaches, I think, 95% of US households, and it's free. So it's not even like, people, Netflix and HBO and Prime, whatever, Amazon Prime. Not a lot of people can afford those things. I know most people have it or think they have it, but not a lot of people do. And so, and then the key thing is that for PBS, as a producer, is they allow me to have editorial control. I had mentioned how ABC had wanted to have a gunfight between the Young Patriots and the Black Panthers, something that never happened, but they wanted that to be in their film. But if they commissioned it, they could have done it, They could have staged something that never happened. And in fiction film, that's the danger of it, is that you're creating a history that never existed if you push it too far. And I just wanted to tell the truth. I think the truth, they say truth is stranger than fiction. I mean, how, Black Panther named Robert E. Lee III. If you created that and put it in a fiction film, people would think that you're pushing it too far. That's a ridiculous thing to say. But that was kind of the way I did it. I mean, again, I just try to be very open with people, and luckily I've worked on 4 or 5 films about the 60s, and luckily it makes it easier because people can get a sense of who I am or not. And there's still some people that have turned me down for interviews, some people that I wanted to be interviewed that are high-level Black Panther members, another movement, they would just say no, they don't. And I never question the reasons. Everybody's at a different place, and so I don't even really question it. I always thought that the film was strong enough with the people we had, but part of it is, again, trying to create a historical record. You want to put as many voices in there because we felt at the time, and it's borne out to be true, is that we didn't know if we were going to have a second chance, in the sense that not everybody that we filmed to make that film is still alive today. So, people are of that certain age with that generation is not, may not be around for much longer, unfortunately. So we felt like the time was now. We needed to get the story out there, tell it the best way we could with the resources we had, and sort of face those realities and get it done and get it on national PBS. And we achieved those goals. I mean, that was basically the goal. And I achieved the goal. So for me, I'm like, hey, I did everything. I said the only bad thing was it took 12 years. I thought it was going to be a lot faster, and it was a struggle. But and one interesting little tidbit is, and I tell this a lot because I think it's indicative of the world we live in, is when I first started applying, people, the funders would say, oh, this is an interesting historical film, but what does that have to do with today? This is like at the beginning, but then things started changing with the society. That's when you started having the protests against the Confederate monuments. And then you had Charlottesville, you know? And so it's like people started saying, hey, this film is actually really important today to talk about this, these alliances when the nation is increasingly divided. And so the film didn't change, it's just that the country started changing. And so the film kind of coincided with these changes that were happening in the overall culture. And that's how the whole thing came about. And, you know, again, it was like, you never know with this stuff, but I totally 100% believed in the film from the beginning. And I still do. And I think, again, and I tell people this, is I think that the Rainbow Coalition is one of the most significant ideas to come out of the 1960s. You know, I think we need to interrogate the 1960s and what its legacy is. I think this Rainbow Coalition is one of the most important things that came out of it.
So essentially that's our time. I want to thank you all for being here. This really means a lot to us, and we hope we can do something in the future again. But yeah, so.
Thank you for the invite. It's been great chatting with you folks. And, you know, I saw Hyde like 2 weeks ago, but I don't see Poison too much. So it's always good to get like these mini reunions of folks. And I still I'm learning new things from them. So that's great.
La lucha continua.
All power.
And if you don't know what to do, just show up. You know, show up. You'll figure out something. And thank you all.
To all those in the audience, if you could do the survey so we can continue doing programs like this, that'd be great. So I'll go ahead and sign all of you off now.
Thank you.
Thank you
Will
for
this
coming,
program
everybody.
be archived?
Yes, yes. This is all going to be recorded, archived, and it will be available to the public in the coming months, hopefully.